welcome back to Medicine for These Times. I am so excited to be here with my former group Mastermind Program client, Katrina. Hi, Katrina. Thank you for being here.
Hey Beth, happy to see you again.
I love interviewing my mastermind clients or my former clients because although we've spent over a year together, there's always so much that I don't learn. And doing these podcast interviews has really gotten us an opportunity to go deeper. So I can't wait to learn all about you more. And I can't wait for the audience to hear about the work that you're doing out there in the world and in the psychedelic space. I'll tell them a little bit about you and then we'll get into it. So Dr. Katrina Michelle is a ceremonial psychotherapist specializing in spiritual emergence and psychedelic integration. She's the founder and director of The Curious Spirit, a New York-based psychotherapy practice, former director of harm reduction at MAPS, and former executive director of the American Center for the Integration of Spiritual Transformative Experiences. She lectures for the Integrative Psychiatry Institute and has taught at New York University Department of Applied Psychology, Columbia University Graduate School of Social Work, Fordham University Graduate School of Social Services, and the Institute for the Development of Human Arts. Katrina is currently involved in conducting research exploring challenging psychedelic experiences with the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium and is working on producing When Lightning Strikes film, elucidating the often unsexy side of spiritual awakening. We will definitely talk about that. And informed by her academic research and her own transcendent experiences, Katrina supports people in exploring, embracing, and integrating the multifaceted human experience. Katrina is passionate about supporting emerging healers and helping professionals to bring their gifts into the world in service of creating a culture that catalyzes and supports our highest human potentials. So Katrina, it's so interesting. I didn't even know you were up to this much. I knew about the film. I knew about the research, which, by the way, you presented at Psychedelic Science, some of your own research, and I knew about your background. But I would love to hear what got you on this path to becoming a psychotherapist, getting into the psychedelic space, also in the, these emergent spiritual experiences. What did you want to do when you were a kid, and how did you get onto this path?
Well, it's really funny because in college I was always the undecided major and I really stuck to my guns there. I wanted time to just experience it all and come to it slowly. And in college I went to a small liberal arts college, so there wasn't a lot going on there, but I was always leaning toward the things that wouldn't get me a real job, right? I leaned into philosophy and my psychology classes. And I think I always kind of in the back of my head knew I would be a therapist. In eighth grade, part of my marriage project assignment, I assigned myself the role of psychiatrist. And so I always knew I was interested in things related to the psyche. But I think even though I meandered and I kind of took my time in college really wanting to explore different avenues, I knew eventually I'd come back to psychology and therapy. My challenge was in finding the right way to do it. So I was always interested in what I now understand to be these altered perceptions of consciousness. But at the time, I didn't have language for it. I didn't have a culture for it. And so I guess I'll share my experience that eventually brought me in that direction. It was actually not a psychedelic substance that took me there. It was a spontaneous episode, which happened to me when I was in college as a psych major, as an undergrad. And I was walking off of the subway in New York City onto Lexington Avenue and was kind of just all of a sudden at once taken out of my body into this complete space of bliss, transcendence, empathy with everybody around me, understanding of the universe on some cosmic level. And it was just this heartbreakingly beautiful experience, which made absolutely no sense. And within moments, I was just back in my body, navigating the city street. And of course, I had no idea what had just happened. I started to try to process that. I had no framework. I'll say I wasn't doing any drugs. I wasn't even doing any spiritual practices at the time. And I sort of just wrote it off as oh, maybe that's the beginning of a psychotic break. because yeah, I didn't have the term spiritual experience. I grew up Catholic and I had disowned that and really, found it restrictive and so yeah, that was kind of how that started. And yeah, so years later, I went on to do my LCSW, my master's in social work, and became a clinical social worker. And then knew that would get me a solid job, however much it was paying me. But I always knew I really wanted to go into this field of understanding more about consciousness, and eventually found my way to get my PhD in transpersonal psychology, which is what my heart really wanted to study. And I kind of thought it was just for my own personal interest, didn't really think it was going to do anything for me professionally, but it really just opened me up. It supported me in my process of integration for that initial experience, which had happened 10 years earlier. And yeah, since then it's been that process of integrating that and allowing for more unfoldment. And yeah, so it brought me into this whole field of finding language for that experience and recognizing that there was really a space where people needed to find language for their experiences and get support. And I ended up working with an organization to train other therapists and coaches around understanding this phenomena. And so, lo and behold, I like to say I came in through the back door of psychedelics, because it was through this exploration of nonlinear experiences that people started coming to me with their psychedelic specific phenomena. So here I am now doing a little bit of everything.
Oh my God. I love it. I knew about certain emergent experiences, but my God, in the middle of New York City, on Lexington Avenue, for any of us that I lived in New York City for a long time, it's a very, very busy avenue, one of the main thoroughfares. But this is incredible. So I'm curious, when was your first actual psychedelic with a substance, like knowingly taking a substance to have a psychedelic or some kind of a transpersonal experience? When was that, and how did that affect this path that you ended up on?
Yeah, so it's funny. What I didn't realize at the time is that cannabis had actually always been something that I experienced as a psychedelic medicine ever since I was, a young 20-something. And I was always really sensitive to it in a way that I guess my peers weren't. It always had a transcendent quality for me that other people just didn't seem to relate to. And I guess now looking back, understanding my tendency to go into these altered states in novel ways, it makes sense that that is a plant medicine that I had been working with sort of without any of the understanding of what the potentials for this work with plant medicine was. And then it was years later, after having integrated some of my more intense personal experiences and growth processes, that I started working with psychedelics more intentionally, and working with ayahuasca specifically was a beautiful opening for me, a beautiful teacher, and I think really gave me a fuller understanding of the potentials here for us to just connect with the cosmos. And and that's where I lose my words, right? Because it's just such a profoundly mysterious space for us.
Yeah. Exactly. I know there's really no words. I'm curious, you were already helping people. You're already, doing psychotherapy and then, dealing with these emergent experiences. Did your, even with cannabis, because I completely agree with you, at a very young age, I was having full on psychedelic trips with cannabis. I personally don't really work with cannabis at all now because it's like too strong for me. It's very funny. But I'm curious, do you feel that where you're at now has been shaped by, the use of, or the working with the psychedelics like ayahuasca? Like, do you feel like your work has been changing over the years since maybe walking deeper onto this path, or is it just kind of like a separate experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the things I'm really grateful for in my work, is that it is so closely paralleled with my own experience, that I get to show up and be me in all of my fullness. And definitely, all of these encounters in the medicine space have influenced how I show up in understanding my clients, understanding their experiences, and now moving into more of the research space as well.
So good. Yeah. So let's talk about, when you came, I remember this, when you came to the mastermind, I looked at your background and was like, wow, she's done a lot. like kind of almost at the point where I was like, do you really need me? Do you really need this program? I mean, you've worked for MAPS, you're involved in a film, you have clients, but there is this thing. I've had a lot of therapists as clients over the years who reach this point, I don't even call it burnout, but some people come to me burnout, or feeling like, but generally it's this feeling that they know they're here for more, that there's something else that wants to birth through them, especially, maybe as you step more and more onto the psychedelic path, and now there's more of a growth and a demand and people coming to you with their experiences. I'm curious, where were you before the mastermind, and what was coming through you during the group mastermind program, and then where are you at now? Because I've seen some things you've recently launched and I'm excited to hear about those. So yeah.
So I think my interest in your mastermind started just with this realization that I was coming out of COVID and I was so burned out, and I had really just needed a refresher. I had needed something to get me engaged again. I was really looking to build community with other people, looking to do ethical business building in the psychedelic space, in the spiritual space, the healing space. And your program appealed to me for those reasons. And I think it really did help me, first of all, develop a different business mindset, because, they certainly don't teach you anything about business in social work school. So it helped me develop more of a business mindset. But what I really gained from it was, aside from lots of wonderful tips and advice about soup to nuts and marketing and strategy and technicalities that I had never really thought about in a linear way before, I really gained so much from the community and from hearing other people's stories and journeys of unfolding. And so I think it was beautiful for me, specifically for that reason, getting to see other people's unfolding into their own process. And that's always been what really lights me up, right? That's why I love my job. And I think that's, for me, aside from all of the technical stuff, that's what I really enjoyed the most, was getting to see people in their own process.
And then tell us what you're up to these days, because I can't even keep track. I know you've, you presented that research as psychedelic science, which to me is a huge deal, You've recently launched a program. I know you've been involved in some retreats. You still have the film going on, and this is all in addition to your actual practice.
Yeah. And, I'm grateful. I do feel like I'm finally sort of recovering from the burnout, and I'm feeling this resurgence of energy, and I'm really grateful for just the healing that has come through me in that. But so I presented the research, which was actually just published today, just went out officially this morning. So I presented that in a poster at the MAPS conference at Psychedelic Science. And then I actually just got back from Tuscany at the International Transpersonal Conference, where I presented about how do we create a culture for spiritual emergence. And spiritual emergence is something that I did my dissertation research on, specifically how we resist it and how much of that is tied to the cultural norms. And so how do we start to live into creating new cultural norms that support people in their expansion, whether it's through medicine work or just through natural personal experiences that people start to experience.
Let's get into that a little bit more. It's interesting, I've gone through what I would call a spiritual emergence since I was maybe 7 or so. I remember at a very young age having these kind of things. I don't know how to explain them even today. I just call them activations, those moments, like kind of like what you experienced on the streets, where there was just a blip and an awareness and something that just felt so, beyond words to describe. And I thought nothing of it until about like 6 years ago. I was like, wait, maybe those were actual, like some kind of spiritual awakenings happening. I don't know. It really never came up again. But I have had those blips in my life, like big growths very quickly that have been challenging, of course, and then also incredible to see how much life changes. But they can be very, very hard. I mean, I know, and I'm sure you've worked with a lot of people like this. a lot of people feel very alone. That's what I went through. I literally had no one to talk to about the experiences I was having. And finally, like one therapist kind of understood, but yeah, let's talk about the spiritual emergence and the research that you're doing and what this is all about, like creating this culture. Because you're right, there's probably a lot of resistance going on.
Yeah, there really is. And, I think what you're describing, especially as a child, is one of those things that we dismiss as a culture. It's like, kids and their imaginations. And, whether or not you're even able to articulate it, who knows how you'd be received. But, in my work over the years, my research and my work with the Assist organization, coming across people who did disclose these experiences and being met with their own judgments, their diagnoses, their pathologies, sometimes being medicated, thinking that they're psychotic and that there's something really wrong going on with them. There's been so much PTSD that I've encountered from people who've been met in the wrong way that I think this is just something we're still stepping into as a culture, is educating our professionals about how to understand these experiences without writing it off as like new agey woo-woo nonsense, because these are legitimate experiences. And, this is also what my film is endeavoring to speak about. So the film is called When Lightning Strikes, The Unsexy Side of Awakening. And it's really meant to help people recognize that you don't have to be on a spiritual path, engaging in spiritual practice, or think of yourself who's interested in pursuing this stuff to have an opening like that. It can happen to these machismo football players who are just walking down the street and suddenly they're hit with this state of cosmic awareness that can wreak havoc in them because they don't understand what's happening and no one in their network knows how to support them. So it's really complex. There's a lot of room for learning. There's a lot of room for growth, and ultimately room for integrating the wisdom of the spiritual traditions, however you understand them, along with modern consciousness research, and, giving people an opportunity to step into their highest selves, because what we're really doing is blocking people from their expansion, and we're keeping people on a level that is not supportive of them stepping into their fullest potentials. And as we know, that's what we're here for.
Wow. And that is true. I mean, I've heard more stories, especially the last few years, of like the random person having that awakening experience. I mean, I get tons of people writing me, tons of people applying to my various programs, sharing about these kind of experiences. And it is very fascinating, because I know what I've personally gone through. It feels like you're in two different worlds. There's this old you, and then there's this new you. And it's like, yeah, if you don't have the right support or you don't know how to make sense out of it, it can be actually very challenging. So I'm curious, where do you think psychedelics and spiritual emergences? Well, first of all, let's define, what is a spiritual emergence for those that might not. I mean, I guess I don't even know what exactly it is. Like,
yeah. Well, I think I think we tend to talk about more as like spiritual awakenings, right? But I use the term spiritual emergence that Stan and Christina Groff used. They coined that term when they published their book by the name of Spiritual Emergency. And the idea of spiritual emergence is it's something that naturally emerges from us. It's a part of our natural human developmental process that unfolds, and it brings us into higher aspects of ourself. So it could be increasing sensory psychic development, and it could also come along with these challenges that our systems don't know how to hold them yet. So it can create some problems along the way as we're trying to kind of walk through the world that honors these new experiences coming to the surface without labeling ourselves or thinking we're crazy. One of the things that's really common in these experiences, people's values change. So I know you interview a lot of people on your show who come from these very different corporate financial backgrounds, and then they come into working in the medicine space because they've gone through a process like this. So what happens when your entire worldview falls apart, everything you've based your sense of meaning and purpose on, and all of a sudden you're in this new space? It's an existential challenge, and you have to find people who can meet you there and help you kind of get the support you need to grow into it and kind of mindfully move out of the spaces you were in. One of the guys we interviewed for When Lightning Strikes is somebody who was in that space of, very materialistic, well-to-do, And then he had this opening and he literally went to the beach in LA and started giving his money away. And, meanwhile, this guy has like 3 kids and his wife is like, what are you doing? So there's a way we have to navigate these, because even though we're opening up to a bigger sense of meaning where we think money doesn't mean as much, we're still living in this world. We still need money to raise our families and to take care of ourselves. So this is the integration process that we talk about. And it happens, we're commonly hearing this phrase integration with psychedelic work, but it also happens with this natural process of spiritual emergence.
Wow. That is incredible. I mean, because I can actually relate to that many times. I've had these moments of like, oh, I should just give it all away and throw it all away and just live on, live on a mountaintop by myself, like just kind of like becoming that, I mean, I've even had thoughts of like, oh, maybe I should go join a monastery and just be a Buddhist monk and just meditate the rest of my life, but then I really like being of this world. I like to serve. So I love that you said the integration, the I word.
Yes.
What I was going to ask about was that maybe it's just because we have more ways of communicating these days, but it feels like more and more people are going through these spiritual emergences. And then there's also this growth of the psychedelic space. Psychedelics are becoming widely more available, kind of in the public eye. There's more and more, what we would call just regular everyday people doing psychedelics who maybe previously wouldn't. Do you think there's a correlation between these two, or if it's just something to do with something larger that's happening? Like, what are your thoughts on this, if any?
Yeah, I mean, I do have thoughts on this. And I can't tell you where these thoughts come from. I can't point to anything concrete, but there's always been a feeling, what I can honestly say is a knowing in me, that we are living through times of big change. And my understanding of that is that these are evolutionary times and people are expanding in their capacities. And of course, that starts to trickle out more and more over time, with the intention of being able to hold the new energy that's coming, the new consciousness that is in many ways already here, but we're still kind of mired in these old systems, these old ways of being that are much more dense. And this is where I start to realize, like, I might sound a little woo to some people, but again, it's just coming from a knowing. And, it's funny, I like to use the example. I had already been in private practice as a therapist for several years when I decided to go back and get my PhD in transpersonal psychology. And so my colleagues at the time really kind of, to me, seemed like they looked at me with like, oh, Katrina, you're so cute. Like, you're going to go study these things. That's great. And I always felt sort of dismissed and judged, but I took it with a grain of salt. That's what it was. And 5 years later, that was back in 2012, I started. 5 years later, when I finally finished my dissertation and I kind of reemerged back into the world after being cocooned for so long, I was like, wait a minute, the world is different now. Now these same therapists are coming to me asking advice for people having these experiences. And the world is suddenly doing yoga and talking about these things. And so, I think we evolve with the times and we don't always see it consciously, but when we step back, we can start to notice how things are shifting. So yeah, it's coming online now because we need it and we're ready for it.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to remind you that the True Path Entrepreneur Group Mastermind Program is open for enrollment now. We start at the beginning of 2024 in January, but we are starting to take applications now. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the Mastermind webpage on my site at bethaweinstein.com/mastermind. This is a 12-month group community-oriented mastermind program where you learn how to start, grow, and get clients in your business so that you can help more people, make a difference in the world, and do work that you absolutely love. This mastermind program is designed for new and early stage coaches, healers, psychedelic entrepreneurs, therapists, and anybody who wants to do transformational work in the world and wants to learn the exact steps you need to know to grow your business to the next level, to be able to share your unique medicine and make a difference in the world. So again, that's bethaweinstein.com/mastermind. The True Path Entrepreneur Group Business Coaching Mastermind Program is open now. That is so funny, but not surprising, because it probably happened with psychedelics as well, right? Like people like,
Oh yeah.
oh no, this is so taboo what you're doing. You shouldn't do that. And then all of a sudden they're like, please teach us. I'm curious.
Oh, literally.
Yeah, tell us about this, because I know you, you do some trainings. You have had people come to you. You've done this research. Has there been a shift in, people wanting to learn more, and you being kind of like one of the earlier leaders in this space? How has that started to change for you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So, I'm in the process now of launching a program with my colleague Elizabeth Sabat, who is one of those wonderful people who defy words. She's a honorary intertribal medicine woman, and she does a lot of work in the mystical realm. And she and I worked together closely while we were at Assist together. She had served as the president for many years, and I was there as the executive director. And we ran these conferences where we trained therapists and coaches and whatnot in these things. And when I started getting more into the medicine space in terms of supporting clients, I recognized that there was a big piece missing. And I've taken several of the clinical training programs out there. And I have to say, I think they're doing a great job for the most part. The ones I'm familiar with, I think they are evidence-based, research-based. They're speaking the clinical lingo. But of course, we're not quite there yet in terms of talking about the spiritual stuff, in terms of talking about the ceremony, in terms of talking about things beyond the material worldview. So Elizabeth and I decided to launch a program specifically to fill this gap. And we've put it out there. We'll be starting in a couple of weeks. And it's called Psycho-Spiritual Safety and Ethics. And the idea is, how do we work safely in the medicine space, not just in terms of like basic harm reduction protocol, but how do we work safely from a spiritual perspective? How do we make sure that our clients are not picking up any entities? How do we make sure that we're not picking up any entities? How do we make sure that we're really keeping the space safe and our psyches clear? And, this is not language I'm used to speaking in public, so it's still a little shaky ground for me, but I also feel really committed to it because, of course, it comes from my own personal experience. And I know I've shared with you and the group in the past that I have had experiences supporting people in ceremony where I do believe there were attachments that came in. And it was the kind of situation where I didn't realize what it was until it was finally cleared from me. So there's a lot we don't know. Psychotherapy and psychotherapists are, of course, well-intentioned. And also there's this huge gap that we need to fill in terms of understanding the plant medicine, the spiritual dimension. We got to do our best to start somewhere. And I think that's the ethical way to look at things.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And by the way, I am so glad you're putting this out there, because I've talked about this too, that there's so many amazing training programs, and I think a lot of them miss this very important step. I only know about most of these training programs through clients who've been in them, but they're kind of very, head-based, they're textbook, they're,
Right.
kind of scientific. And the reality is, a lot of people in these programs want to hold space, whether it's, in a psychedelic space or an integration space, which is, to me, it's kind of the same field on some level. Mm-hmm. And I completely agree with you. This is not being talked about enough, except the people I know who hold medicine space. They'll talk about it. But right. This is what I've been saying for years. I feel like this is a very big missing piece for people that are looking to step into this space. And I also agree with you. I've had personal experiences where I was like, wow, I did not realize that could happen. And it did. And it, until you actually know and feel it and experience it yourself, which I think a lot of people have maybe experienced and not even, realized. I think, that's probably has happened to all of us. So I'm really glad you're putting that out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about this idea of ceremony and psychotherapy. This is another thing I remember when you were in the mastermind, kind of trying to bring all of yourself into your practice. And that's a huge part of what we do inside of the mastermind. There's so many people that come in who maybe have had, multiple different trainings and experiences. And, they come saying like, how do I bring all of my passions to my work? Especially as a therapist, you have the kind of traditional business model with clients. And then there's so much more to it. And then there's also what you want to be doing, like maybe you, and maybe not you, some other clients I've had in the past say that, okay, well, I really love this. And there's a big part of myself I'm not bringing to my practice. And I'm curious, we've talked about how, you want to bring in kind of this idea of like the ceremony, this other aspect into the therapy space. Let's hear about that. And what was your process to kind of allowing this to come through?
Yeah, well, it's funny, I think I've always been doing this subtly, and it's one of the reasons I went to social work school, because I met some pretty cool social workers back in the day when I was doing my research, and I was like, they're able to kind of take a past life regression training and then incorporate it. So I've always done it, but I've always done it in a very measured way according to the individual client. And I think, it does dovetail with what I'm offering in this new training is really acknowledging that the ceremonial aspect is what's missing from that personal inquiry space, whether it's a medicine space or a therapeutic space, bringing in ritual, bringing in ceremony, opening up to support from the spiritual dimension, opening up to things that are a little bit more outside of the clinical boxes, can really support us in our own process, right? It helps us get out of that control center of the left brain where we're always needing to kind of dominate and organize the material, and lets us open up into the right brain where things are more malleable, things are more flexible. And that's where that flow starts to come in. That's where the ease starts to come in. That's where the parasympathetic nervous system can start to come online and support us. So I think bringing in the ceremony is my way of having a creative expression in my sessions, just giving myself a little bit more flexibility to be fully myself and bring in what my intuition is guiding me toward, and letting my clients know from the get-go that this is how I work. And if they want to work with me, that I really would like them to be as open as possible to these modalities.
And how is that I love this. How has that worked? I mean, are you getting more and more clients that are into this, or have there been people that are like kind of freaked out by it? Yeah. What's been your experience?
There are some people who aren't ready for it yet. And I think that's totally fine. We all have our growth process. But one thing I've always noticed is that when I fully commit to something for me, people who are aligned with that energy, even if I'm not talking about it, start to find me. And, I can usually just tell on the first call with somebody if there's somebody that is going to resonate with what I have to offer. And usually after that first session, they'll know if they're ready to go deeper with me or not. So yeah, it's one of those things, when you put it out there, everything starts to organize around it. So it's just about me kind of stepping into my truth some more.
And I remember during the Mastermind program, you would have this happen. You would just have like people come out of the blue and, things land in your lap. And I was like, wow, but I do believe it's what you just said. It's like when you are putting it out there, when you take the little steps to even just have the intention. I always say there's not actually a lot of work one needs to do in the mastermind. I mean, yes, there's some things that, maybe will get you more results, but I've had clients go through this mastermind, not really do anything. And it's really just about starting to align with their truth. Like, what is it that you really want? What's getting you excited? What is it you want to start putting out there? What's emerging through you? And when you start to really accept it and bring it in, integrate it, and then take even just the energetic steps to bring it out there, this is where the kind of magical miracles start happening. People come to you and there's an attraction point. And I always say things get a little easier. And I always put it in quotes because I don't want people getting, like, oh, this is just going to be easy. Well, no, it's hard, like everything.
Of course. Yeah, but it starts with your truth. And I think if we focus on our truths, I think we all are here with a purpose and we all have this unique signature. And the closer we get to not being afraid to execute that unique signature, the more we're fulfilling our divine purpose. And if more of us start doing that, I think that's the new world that we're looking to build. And I think that's what we need for the shifts that are happening around us.
Huge, huge. Now I'm curious, when you look at yourself as a person, not just your business, but your whole life, because you are also in our secret Moon School program that happened after the Mastermind, which is not actually available to the public yet, maybe one day. I'm curious, when you look at where you were in your life before joining the Mastermind, where you are today, what do you find has been some of the biggest shifts? Like, just being around that community or in the container or being held in that way, what do you think has changed the most, or the top few that has changed the most in your life?
Yeah, it's funny. The first thing that comes to mind is I don't feel as exhausted as I used to. I feel like something about the way I have shifted to execute the projects that I'm working on has allowed me to find a balance in what I'm doing instead of coming from that place of exasperation. And I do think that's over time through the mastermind and through our secret moon school, just gradually refining exactly what it is I want to do based on my interest, my energy, my passion, my calling, and just letting myself lean into that more instead of coming from that place like many of us do, where we get into scarcity, we get into fear, we get into, concerns about the obligations of our licensure, right? So not being afraid to kind of go outside of the box a little bit and just open up to following my heart more. And I think for all of us, if we just lean into that incrementally over time, we are all going to find what we're looking for.
Yes, I completely agree. And you did just mention something that comes up with so many people about the license and this limit, the limitations of, with therapists, with nurses. There's a lot of fear around even sharing about your own psychedelic journeys or sharing even your stance on psychedelics as, a therapist or a nurse. I've seen this for years, and I always wonder is it really a possibility that just because you say you believe in the healing potential of psychedelics that your license is going to get taken away? I mean, is that a thing? And I'm curious, have you run into any, issues with your license? I mean, you were working at MAPS at one point. You presented research. You are currently, doing this film. Has anything ever come up that's been kind of like threatening or a negative around your status and your license?
No. I mean, I think, knock on wood, I think I'm doing everything by the book. There are ways that therapists can legally trips it. There are ways that we can legally offer psychedelic assisted therapy, whether that's ketamine in New York State or whether that's offering a substance like psilocybin in Mexico or somewhere where a substance like that is legal. There are ways that we can do this. And I think, again, it comes down to what do I really value? And what I really value is helping people meet their personal goals for healing, for personal growth. And the way I've started to frame it to myself is that if I am able to access a tool that I know can help someone and I don't make that available to them, I'm not really abiding by the ethical code that I want to hold myself a standard by, right? So that's how I think about it now. And, one step at a time with the licensure. I think we're catching up, and hopefully in the next couple of years, we won't have as many limitations. And that's why, I want to be prepared, and I want other people who are interested in working with this field to be prepared as well.
Yeah. And I love what you just said about your own ethical, boundaries around like, okay, if I'm keeping help from clients, this is also something that's true there, right? It's like, well, and establishing what's most important for you. And we have seen, even in the group mastermind, we've seen other people go from, one place of holding on to that license to actually letting go of a license 18 months later. because of that alignment of like, you know what, I don't even know if I ever want to do this again, and this is what I'm stepping into. And I always say this to people, like, look, I understand getting a license is a big deal, and there's, years of schooling and training and applications and tests, but at the same time, if you're expanding on your path into whatever's next and whatever's new, and maybe it doesn't align with the way that system and the limitations have, then I don't know.
Right.
What's so bad? I mean, you don't get fired from being human, right? Like, you don't get
right.
excommunicated. So it's like you said, like establishing what we stand for and what our truth is, and what your boundaries are and where your own ethics are, is really such a good way to, make these decisions. But, I always say, like you said, I think things are going to change over the years. I think I always have this motto of like, no risk, no reward. And like, what are we all standing for? And especially in the psychedelic space, just being in the space involves a little risk. I mean,
exactly.
I have not had any cops in my door yet, so it's not really that risky. And like you said, there are many legal ways around all of this and integration help and other ways of supporting people. Speaking about other ways of supporting people, I would love to hear all about this new program that you're launching. And then, I don't know when it starts, but I'm wondering if you're going to run it again.
Yeah, so the first cohort is starting November 7th, and then we're probably going to run it again early next year. So if people are interested, they can definitely get in touch with me. And we're calling this a psycho-spiritual safety and ethics training. And it's a 6-week program. It's going to meet weekly for about 90 minutes. And we're really going to go through various elements about creating that sacred ceremony to work with plant medicine and support your clients even in a psychotherapeutic ceremonial space in a way that will give you access to something that perhaps you haven't had access to or education about before. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited about my collaborator being willing to offer us up her knowledge in this area. She's been someone I've really trusted with my own process over the years, and I'm eager for other people to connect with her and what we have to offer through this.
Sounds amazing. Now, I'm curious, is it more geared towards therapists or people that are counselors, or is it really anybody who maybe like holds space or sits in the space? Like, who's it for?
Yeah, so it's inspired by my role as a therapist and sort of seeing what's lacking in the space, but it's certainly open to anyone who is interested in working in the psychedelic medicine space or is already serving as a space holder, trip sitter, coach, integration coach, anything like that. We really want to make it accessible for people to just develop new skill sets and new language around working with, dare I say this, interdimensional space, because let's face it, that's what's really happening here. These are more than just brain chemicals sweeping around.
Exactly. And, I would love to see you talking more about the interdimensional space out there in the world. I think everybody would.
Yeah, well, here we go. I just said it out loud for the first time, so...
We got to be, the reality is anyone who works with medicines, would agree. It's not just chemicals. It's not just this, like altered state for a few hours. It's like, it changes your entire perception of reality. And it's kind of like they say, it's like you enter in through this cave, there's no turning back. I don't know. Maybe some people have learned how to unlearn what they've learned, but we have to really accept it. And I think people are really ready for this, especially because it's not being talked about. And I think a lot of the reasons why these training programs have left this big piece out is because of that fear of like, well, we have to be kind of in this old world of like, we're going to just give you information for your mind and that's it.
Right.
But that's not really what happens in that actual space. And everybody who's been in a space knows that.
Exactly.
So speaking of, coming out and speaking more about who you truly are and the interdimensional work, what else do you have coming up? And I would love to know, where can people find you? What do you offer? How do people work with you?
Yeah, well, I'm most excited about supporting other healers and helpers, whether it's people who are interested in working in the medicine space, people on their own spiritual journey. I do a lot of mentorship and supervision for, people who may need clinical hours around getting their own licensure or just want to check in with somebody who's a little bit more flexibly minded. So, yeah, I'm looking at exploring more offerings for that in the next year. What I'd really like to do is build out the mentorship program I had started in your program, which was a 9-month experience for helpers and healers to really dive in deep together and create a space of working through your own burnout and exhaustion to coming into more alignment with who you are so you can offer that up to your clients. And that will be through dedicated ceremonial space with me and ideally with each other in personal retreats.
So good. Well, we're going to have your links right here in the show notes. We'll have more about this upcoming training as well as a discount code for the audience. Katrina, I just have to say I'm so proud of where you've come from and where you are now, everything you're up to. I'm so excited for what's next. It's been such a pleasure to witness you. And it's really funny to think back when I had that first call with you. I just thought like, wow, this person's just so incredible. I can't wait to see what else is available there. Like what else is going to come through during the mastermind when you're already up to so much, you've already contributed so much in the world. And now it's just, this never ending expansion that keeps happening. So, and I'm so glad you're less exhausted and much more into this work. I think that's what happens, and I know this feeling myself from the past, but when we're not really being 100% who we are and allowing what needs to come through and what's emerging from us, if we kind of push it to the back burner or we pretend, it doesn't exist, it's actually just draining our energy. And I keep saying like, that's the whole point of this program, or, whether it's my program or any other, but really stepping into who you truly are. It's a different well that runs you. It's like a different kind of energy. And it is much easier to get out of bed in the morning and get excited to get to work because now it's a freedom. You get to be who you truly are.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it, Beth. And thank you. Thanks for holding the container for me and helping me in my process. And thank you for not going into the mountaintop cave and being here to support all of us.
For now.
One day at a time.
I know, right? We'll see. I don't know. So great to have you. And everybody will have another episode next week on Medicine for These Times.